Hey guys, welcome to my channel Run Free and Strong. I'm Reto. It's been about 7 days since my 7 Trails 100-mile ultramarathon in Damascus, Virginia. Recovery's going well. I hope to be back out running this weekend. In the meantime, I wanted to share a few reflections and takeaways from my 100-mile ultramarathon. I grouped my reflections and lessons learned into 5 categories: training, race format, strategy, fuel and hydration and gear, and I'll close out with what I would do different for my next ultramarathon. In the training category, there are 4 things that work really well for me. If you followed my 16-week ultramarathon training plan and the weekly reviews, you know that I invested heavily in weekly mileage, time on feet, and vertical gain. I think that paid off. I put a lot of miles into my legs, and that paid off during my 7 Trails 100. In addition, I went all in with winter training. I live and train in Connecticut, and this past winter was cold with lots of snow. Not always easy to get out, but I got it done. And I think for Spring Ultra, that was a key success factor. I spent quite a bit of time every week running technical trails and vert on the Appalachian Trail, Trout Brook Valley, or Macedonia State Park. Although not a prerequisite for a flat runnable course, the technical trails and vert strengthened me as a runner, and that paid off, particularly in the late stages of these 7 trails. And finally, let's talk a little bit about running economy. If you've been following my channel a little bit, you know that I put a huge emphasis on improving my running economy, whether it's through lactate threshold workouts, strides, using my stride foot pod to measure and give me feedback on how I'm doing and what I need to improve. Running economy has been a big one for me. I think I mentioned in one of the videos that in my November Yeti 100-mile virtual, I took about 250,000 steps. So to the extent I can improve running economy even 1%, that's huge. And if you've watched the 7 Trails race video, you know that I struggled once I got past 100K, particularly with lower back injury, 2 herniated discs. So again, running economy was important. Next, let's cover category 2, the 7 Trails 100 race format. The 7 Trails Ultra Festival was a 3-day event with races from 25K up to 100 miles. It was run on the Virginia Creeper Trail, a flat, runnable groomed trail from Damascus towards Abingdon, with a turnaround quarter mile past the iconic abandoned Pepsi machine on the side of the trail, headed back to Damascus. For 25K, that meant runners were doing 2 out and back loops. For 100 miles, runners like myself would do the full 13 out and back loops, each 7.7 miles. There was a single aid station in Damascus that was fully stocked day and night, and enabled runners to deposit and access their drop bags. I chose to run the 100-mile ultra self-supported, which means I had no crew and no pacer. There were definitely some challenges. In my opinion, running as many as 13 loops for a 100-miler was mentally challenging, and probably more so than doing a point-to-point course or an out-to-back or a course that had far fewer and larger loops. Just counting the loops off one by one and realizing even as I started to hurt around loop 8 and 9 that I still had 4 or 5 loops to go was tough. At the same time, runners were finishing their 50 milers, their 100Ks, or calling a race, and watching this every time I came into the aid station and knowing that I was hurting and struggling and needed to go back out to get to 100 miles, again, was mentally tough. Both the 100-miler and the 100K race started at 5 a.m. on Friday morning. The shorter races started on Saturday, and at 5 a.m. on Friday, the temperature was 29 degrees or -2 Celsius. It warmed up all the way to 65 degrees in the afternoon, or about 18 Celsius. And then at night, it dropped back down to about 40 degrees or 5 Celsius. So weather was definitely a challenge. It's dark, it's 5 a.m., It's freezing cold, and I knew I had to go 100 miles was just a lot. Category 3 is race strategy. I used a run-walk-run strategy from the start. 3 minutes of running, 2 minutes of walking, 3 minutes of running. I felt that was a better approach to get to 50 miles in reasonable condition, which I did. I passed 50 miles in 10 hours and 40 minutes, which for me was a good time. I knew from my other 200-mile ultras that the tough part of the race starts at 50 miles. Another intermediate goal was to reach 100K or 62 miles before darkness. I was able to sustain the run-walk-run strategy all the way to 100K and passed that milestone in 13 hours and 16 minutes. Unfortunately, at 100K, the wheels started to come off. I needed to assess and pivot. At that point, I threw my time goals out the window. I was running at around a 22-hour 100-mile ultra if I could have sustained it, which obviously I did not. And it became important for me to complete the race, achieve my goal, and earn that buckle. I wanted to manage my highs and lows so I wouldn't come into the aid station and watch someone else drop down and not go out for another loop and feel tempted to do the same. I needed to keep my motivation level high. I wanted to celebrate other runners around me and draw energy from them to keep going. At 100K, when the wheels started to come off, I was feeling excruciating pain from my 2 herniated discs in my lower back, and it became almost impossible to run, and I was doing mostly walking. I needed to take longer aid station breaks, and sometimes even on the trail, to relieve the pain and pressure on my lower back, so I knew that I could finish the 100 miles. Unfortunately, these longer breaks added to my total elapsed time for the 100-mile ultramarathon, and I ultimately finished in 28 hours and 57 minutes, which included probably 4 or 5 hours of non-moving time. My longest break was 90 minutes. Here's the 4th category I wanted to talk about. I created a video about my race kit for the 7 Trails Ultramarathon. I'll put the link up top. And for those of you who had an opportunity to view that, you know that I was extremely organized and detailed with my race kit preparation. This was key because I stored my drop bag at the Damascus aid station and I was accessing it every loop of the 13 loops. So having ready, quick, organized access saved time and reduced stress, and I got very quickly what I needed. For some of you who watched that race kit video, you were surprised in how much gear I was bringing, and in the end, it paid off. The severe weather changes that I described, from 29 Fahrenheit to 65 Fahrenheit to 40 Fahrenheit, and the last hour in the morning on Saturday, it started raining, meant I had to not only have a very diverse set of clothes, I also had to have multiple pieces for each type of clothing so that I could change. For example, I start off in tights on multiple layers, hats and gloves at 5 a.m. and it didn't warm up till probably about noon, and by 3 or 4 it was very warm, and I stripped all the way down to a short sleeve t-shirt. By early evening, the temperature started to dip again, wind picked up a little bit, I was tired, I was sweaty, I had to go back to a multi-layer outfit, back to hats and gloves. Because of the almost 29 hours that I ran, I needed to make sure I had a change of clothes for every 2 or 3 loops so that I could stay dry and warm. There were 2 game changers I wanted to mention in my gear kit. One was the athletic tape. I taped my feet, my toes, the sole of my feet and my heels, and I was good to go. I had 0 lost toenails, no blisters after 100 miles. At the end of the race, when I took off my shoes and stripped off my socks, the white athletic tape was completely black from the trail mud and fine dust. And if I had not taped my feet, all that stuff would have gotten in my skin and over 100 miles, based on past experience, cracked my feet and done some major damage. The second game changer was my Black Diamond Carbon Z trekking poles, which I broke out at 100K, again when the wheels came off, took with me, and I would not have been able to go the last 38 miles and finish that 100 miles if it wasn't for the trekking poles. Checked my ego and said, I'm bringing the poles at 100K and we're finishing this race. The last category is fuel and hydration, and there are clearly some lessons learned from my past 2 ultramarathons that applied to the 7 trails. First, and very important, was ensure that I was properly fueled and hydrated pre-race. Both the day before and the morning of the race, I ate and drank everything I could. All joking aside, I wanted to be at the start line feeling very comfortable with my fueling and my hydration, and I was. I tried the best I could early in the race to maintain my fuel and hydration intake and not to get into a deficit. And for those of you who watch the race video, you know that I struggled. It was probably due to the cold and the darkness early in the race. My fuel intake consisted primarily of real food, starting with peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, bananas, ramen noodle soup, cheese quesadillas, and later in the race, potato chips for the salt. Although there were times during the race when my energy level was low due to lack of fuel, or I felt dehydrated, I never crashed or bonked. During the middle of the race, particularly between miles 40 and 50, or maybe even up to 100K mark, I struggled with major gastrointestinal issues. I had stomach cramps that were so severe it was hard for me to run and even walk. For me, an important part of reflecting on the 7 Trails 100-mile ultramarathon is to identify things that I can improve and do better and become a better runner. Before we do that, a couple of observations. First, training for a 100-mile ultramarathon requires a major time commitment and lots of patience. Second, I'm still relatively new to ultra trail running. I transitioned from the road to the trail about 15 months ago in January of 2020. For the 7 Trails 100, I ran really well up to 100K, and then the wheels came off. One of my overarching goals for the next race is to bridge that gap between 100K and 100 miles and to run 100 miles in sub 24 hours. So here are 4 things I would change for next time. Number 1, I need to increase my weekly mileage to about 70 miles and my time on my feet to about 14 hours. During my 16-week ultramarathon training plan for 7 trails, my best weekly mileage was 65 miles and my best time on feet was 12 hours. I need to do more. I need to increase the volume of my back-to-back long runs on the weekend. Again, for the 16-week training plan, I would do back-to-back long runs on the weekend that would total between 30 and 35 miles. I probably need to up that to 40 miles plus. I also want to do more strength and mobility work, particularly strengthen my core, lower back, and improve my stability. That means doing more single leg exercises, whether it's single leg squats, Romanian deadlifts, what have you. And finally, I need to practice more with fuel and hydration during my long back-to-back training runs. Hopefully sharing my reflections of the 7 Trails 100-mile ultramarathon has been helpful. And if it has, I would appreciate if you give the video a big thumbs up, hit that like button. If you're new to my channel, it would mean a lot to me if you consider subscribing. Thank you very much for watching, and see you in the next one.